thank you so much for joining me today. My name is Steve Vorster, and I am teaching economics at the American International School of Bucharest in Romania. And I've been here for 18 months and thoroughly enjoying discovering this part of the world. I'm also one of the Kognity IGCSE authors, and I've been working with the people at Kognity for the past year, the beautiful people at Kognity. I really want to give a shout out to all those fabulous people. I think it's an amazing company, and their ethos to serve the education community and to serve 28,000 teachers, absolutely beautiful. So big shout out to all of you at Kognity. Prior to Bucharest, I was the head of economics at United World College of Southeast Asia, Dover campus in Singapore, working with some fabulous people there. Now, as an economist, I don't like doing things that are not efficient. So when I started teaching, I was really focused on content. It really was about getting to grips with my subject, focusing on content and lesson planning. And somewhere along the line, somewhere in the journey, I started focusing more on learning, the process of learning. And when I did that, it became a fascinating journey for me because I realized that some of my practice was inefficient. It wasn't bad, it was just inefficient. The time that I was putting into it did not yield the results or the outcomes as effectively as I would have liked. And so today's session is about sharing with you some of the strategies that I have developed, that I've used in my own classroom. And the idea is that it will increase your effectiveness. So we're going to have a short overview of Hattie's research and then look at 5 powerful strategies in an applied way. I may share with you economics strategies, but these are transferable. You can make them work in your subject area, whatever that is. Okay, the challenge. We're going to look at traditional versus the contemporary approach. We'll unpack that. Secondly, we're going to focus on learning principles. These are research-based approaches to developing your craft. We're going to unpack those a little bit. Thirdly, we are going to focus on effectiveness. And this is where we're going to look at Hattie's effect factors. And we're going to look at his research and its relevance for us in the classroom. And we are going to end with a focus on building your toolkit. I'm hoping that you leave the session with a couple more Allen keys in your toolkit, a couple more wrenches, little fine-tuning spanners, all of those things that help to make teaching and learning a beautiful symphony in our classrooms. Okay, so what is the challenge? Traditional versus contemporary. So a traditional teaching approach focuses on content. Now, I appreciate that educational frameworks are very different. We've got people in this call who may be working within MYP or the AP or the IB DP or IGCSE. So some of you may have more or less content than others. However, in economics, we have a lot of content to get through. So as a teacher, I'm always feeling the pressure to get through the topics and to get through the content. And so I could just focus on content and then give myself a big tick at the end of the 2-year cycle and say, job well done, Steve. You did it. You got through the content. We focus on differentiation. We meet the needs of all learners. We want to help develop assessment for learning tasks that give us feedback on the individual student's progress and then adapt, modify. So I'm putting this under traditional. Some of you may be surprised by that. I'm going to say a few things about that in a minute. We focus on differentiation by task or outcome or feedback, okay? And I put that under a traditional approach. And then we perhaps focus on lesson structure. So when I started teaching, I was 35, came to it later. And this was really a core part of my teacher training about starters, range of activities, a plenary, and home learning. So this was very much my focus as a teacher, and it really focused on these 3 things. Now, because I've got these under the traditional box and they've got red icons next to them, does not mean they are bad. What it means is that that's a traditional way of approaching lessons in class, and we should still be focused on that, but we should have a higher level focus. And this is the contemporary approach. Sitting above that, we should be focusing on learning. We should be using the research-based evidence that we have to improve our teaching and learning and to help us to structure our lessons so that they are more effective. We should focus on effectiveness. Why put time and energy into perhaps certain starters or activities or plenaries which are less effective than other strategies that we could use that utilize the same amount of time? So we're going to unpack John Hattie's meta-study in a little bit more detail in a few minutes. And lastly, this is something I love doing, is we should focus on building our toolkit. So I think it's a very kind of old school approach, kind of traditional approach to get our lesson flow sorted, to have 3 or 4 strategies in the bank and to say, it worked for me last year, I'm going to run with it again this year. And something that I love is you're passionate about teaching and learning. That's why you're on this call. You're wanting to grow your toolkit. You're wanting to develop that. And that's what keeps us fresh in our craft. And that's what keeps us growing in our profession and helping us to engage and raise attainment and raise outcomes, improve outcomes across the board. Okay, let's dig into these. Okay, focus on learning principles. So when I was working at UWC, there was an amazing group of people who actually put these learning principles together. And they were, I believe they were published in about 2012, 2013. And learning principles give us a research-based approach to teaching and learning. And most of your schools probably have learning principles. What often happens is they get printed out on posters and put into classrooms, or they get put onto the school website, or a team may initially draft the learning principles, run them past the faculty, and then they get used for a short period of time, but then other areas of development encroach and like new fads come in, and the learning principles kind of get relegated to the back end of the website. Not like that in all schools. I'm saying in many schools that is the scenario. Also, people who drafted the learning principles may have moved on, and the turnover of staff has an impact on the connection with those learning principles. So somewhere, I'm hoping your schools have learning principles. If not, maybe put a professional learning committee together to begin to explore what research shows about this. So when these were introduced at UWC, I've got 6 of the 10, and I'm not going to go through them all. I'm just going to highlight as an example what they did. So let me pop up all 3. I've got 3 on this page, 3 on the next page. So learners feel secure and supported. Therefore, learners need a positive and respectful learning environment in which it is safe to succeed or to make mistakes and try again. So we started using these in our classroom to engage with students. And I had some feedback early on from a student, which said to me, I don't feel safe and secure in this classroom. So I arranged to meet with that student, and it was a really fascinating discussion, because what emerged from it was not what I had feared. I've always strived to create a respectful, positive, highly engaging classroom. And I'd been shocked by the fact that the student was saying they did not find it to be like that. But what it emerged in the conversation was, it really was much more peer focused. It was, the message communicated to me is, it's a very judgy year group. If you get things wrong, you get laughed at behind your back, things get said. This is not a positive and respectful learning environment for me. So having this learning principle in place allowed me to then open a conversation with the class. And because these principles were being used across the whole school at the time, I believe similar conversations were happening in other classes as well. So that's a way that kind of having that banner of the learning principle sitting over the lesson actually begins to change the learning environment in the classroom and move it from a point where people are scared to speak up and speak out and possibly get things wrong to where they actively embrace it, acknowledge mistakes in a positive way, and help people to grow and to move on. Okay, So learners construct new understanding by building upon prior knowledge. Learners listen, talk, and interact with others. My school was nothing like that. I sat and stared at the front and was not allowed to talk in my lessons. And so having this as a learning principle really begins to drive my desire as a teacher to go, well, what's the significance of learners talking and interacting with one another? How does interaction, how does discussion, how does groupthink, how does think, pair, share move learning forward? And we'll look at some examples of that today. Okay, so 3 other learning principles from UWC, and this is not the main aim of the session, so I'm not going to spend too long on these. You can have a look at the top 2, ownership of learning, connections between knowledge, which talks about core concepts, which is very strong in the IB Diploma or in the IB philosophy. Last one, because I'm going to come back to this. Learners think and act upon their learning. Therefore, learners need opportunities to develop strategies to plan, monitor, reflect, and make adjustments to learning as needed. So this is really talking about something called self-regulated learning. And this was kind of a new idea for me when these were introduced in 2012, 2013. I didn't fully understand how to engage with this in my classroom. After all, I'm a subject teacher. I teach content, I teach economics. But as I walk down this journey, and I continue to walk down this journey, I begin to find strategies that unlock really effective learning practices. So if you know your school's learning principles, wonderful. If you use them, wonderful. If you're not using them, go back to them and just begin to look at the learning principles. There's real power in a faculty coming together based around learning principles and focusing their professional development and their professional growth on the learning on the learning principles as a community. Okay. I'll give you a minute to read the quote on the screen. So this takes energy. It's easy to show up to lessons and do what we've always done. And John Hattie acknowledges that. He says it requires passion to see the impact of one's teaching and to maintain the energies, the mission and the attention to student learning. And then he goes on to say it requires a narrative about effort, learning, high expectations, and avoiding a language of labels, ability, and low expectations. So a narrative, that's something that we need to be talking about in our classroom. So connecting with the work of Carol Dweck on growth mindset and intelligence not being fixed, but being malleable, really important to be bringing that language into our classrooms as teachers. And if we're doing that across the board, it begins to build in a powerful way. Okay, let's focus on effectiveness. Let's have a quick look. Some of you may be very familiar with how Hattie's meta study worked. If so, bear with me for a minute or two as I explain it, and then we'll get into some of the strategies. So in 2009, Dr. John Hattie published Visible Learning. And what it was a synthesis of 800 meta-studies that had been done looking at learning interventions and looking at the effectiveness of learning interventions. So a meta-study is a study that might take 50 or 60 different studies on the same topic. So for example, it may just look at, it would be done with a control group and a study group. So you'd have 2 groups of exactly the same students. The control group would spend a certain amount of time, an exact amount of time, let's say 3 lessons in 1 week, doing lessons just the normal way. And the second group would spend 3 lessons in 1 week, doing lessons exactly the same amount of time, but they would introduce, for example, some discussion about metacognition, thinking about thinking. And they would test before and they would test after, and then they would look to see if there was a difference in outcomes. And so meta-studies would combine all of those and then look at averages. And what was significant about Hattie's meta-study is that he took 800 meta-studies and was able to produce a list. It's been updated twice. It now has a list of 232 interventions that impact on student learning. The key thing to note is that when we look at the effect of each intervention, he says the following, that as students grow and develop the physiological development, there's a natural growth, 0.15. It's the yellow area. If there are certain things that reverse student learning, so a lack of sleep, which is one thing that I speak about a lot in my classroom, is a reverse effect on learning. There are kind of normal teaching procedures. If we just show up as teachers, we go through things, we should be hitting the average of 0.4. And Hattie called this the hinge point. He was like, okay, so if the normal process takes you to 0.4, then we should be focusing on strategies that kind of shift you up way beyond 0.4 into the 1 area, 1.2 or 0.7. And what's important to note is that a +1 effect size equates to 2 grades at IGCSE or diploma if you are using an exam-based syllabus. So that's pretty significant. So as a teacher, I can take my students from 0.4 to 1 or 1.2 or 1.5. I can be adding 2 and 3 grades to their development. So the value added that I'm bringing to my classroom is very significant. Okay, so 0.4 is the hinge factor. How are we doing for time? 20 minutes. Okay, we are good. So these were some of the factors at the top end of the scale. And the Hattie power strategies that I'm going to unpack really focus on these. Collective teacher efficacy 1.57 is about teachers coming together across the board in the school and believing that intelligence is not fixed, believing that children can grow, not labeling students, being able to bring an understanding of learning into their classrooms and frame conversations with students in the context of learning. All teachers using the learning principles begin to tap into collective teacher efficacy. It's about that beautiful harmony of a group of people working from a supportive point of view of every student in their care, pushing them up to be everything that they can be, not labeling, not limiting. Okay, we're going to look today in a bit more detail at self-reported grades, conceptual change programs. So self-reported grades 1.33 effect size. That's nearly 3 grades. That's 2.5 grade difference. So for me, again, as an economist, if I put time into developing this mechanism of self-reported grades in my classroom, that is really, really effective. Okay, what else are we going to have a look at? Cognitive task analysis and classroom discussion. Okay, so that is a quick overview to Hattie's research. He's published quite a few books. It's been updated 2009, 2014, I think it was in 2017. So if you've not come across his work, please go and have a look at it. We just are touching on it today and it's fabulous. Right, now, just a word of warning. Don't ignore the 0.15 to 0.4 factors. So reducing class sizes came in at 0.21. It really didn't move student learning forward. So many admin and faculties around the world looked at that and were like, yes, we can make class sizes bigger. And teachers were groaning. I go, no, don't do that. But problem-based learning is another one. 0.26, inquiry-based learning 0.4. Now, here's why you should not ignore them. For example, the conditions and the way you use problem-based learning can significantly change that number. So Hattie recommends that you don't use problem-based learning until there is a full and deep conceptual understanding of the content. So if you start your lesson with problem-based learning, which lots of educators would do, then the effect size is very low. But if you teach an area of content and then use problem-based learning, you are able to leverage it in a much more powerful way. In fact, Hattie goes on to say that at university, it should not be used widely in university courses until the 3rd or 4th year, so that there is a strong foundation in the content before that happens. Okay, let's focus on building our toolkit. We are 23 minutes in. Okay, so wherever you are today, we're all at different points. I want you to be strategic in your approach. And what do I mean by that? Well, if you are a new teacher and you've got a content-based syllabus, very quickly focus on assessment and exam components. Get up to speed in the different examination papers, the assessment objectives, and you can actually do that in the summer holiday before you start teaching, if you're teaching a new course. If you haven't done that, work on that really quickly. One of the impacts that has is it builds teacher credibility. And I can't remember the exact value or effect of teacher credibility, but if you can stand up and speak with knowledge and insight into the exam components, you build your teacher credibility immediately. Syllabus and content, you can work on that as you go along. Be a couple of weeks ahead. Plan your lessons 4 to 6 weeks ahead. In your lessons, be incorporating differentiation and AFL. I would highly recommend, if you haven't, it depends on your stage. Everyone is at a different stage, and I fully appreciate that. Look at AFL strategies, things like think, pair, share. How does that work? Entry and exit tickets. There's some wonderful resources available. Writing frames and levels of EAL support. So all of that can be happening. If you are kind of around this wagon wheel, this is where we dive into power strategies. Once we've got some of those traditional and foundational aspects sorted, we begin to really think about the learning that's happening in our classroom. Actually, I've said that a little bit incorrectly, because it's not like once we've got them sorted. We should be thinking about the learning immediately, but this is a little order of priority that I'm trying to introduce. I hope that makes sense, that I've clarified that. And then we dive into these power strategies. So once you're comfortable with syllabus and content, I would be kind of going back and forward in these two areas, developing my craft. Okay, number 1, cognitive task analysis. 1.29, so this can leverage attainment by nearly, well, it's probably 2.5 grades. Okay, so fairly significant. Now, it's a type of task analysis aimed at understanding tasks that require a lot of cognitive activity from the user, such as decision-making, problem-solving, memory, attention, and judgment. I love this image of these 2 Vietnamese boys spearfishing, because the task is to get the fish into the bucket. That's what the task is. But there's a whole process of cognitive task analysis that has to happen in order for that to happen. And I love the way that the boy on the left is pointing out and kind of giving some instruction, because some of the processes that would revolve around this would be decision making. Which river are we going to go to? Which section of which river are we going to go to? What time of day are we going to go to the river? When you get there, problem solving. Well, there's no fish in the shallow water, but there's a section of deep water. How are we going to chase the fish? We know there's fish in this river. How are we going to chase the fish from the deep water to the shallow water so that we can spearfish them? Memory. The last time I did this task, what worked? I seem to remember throwing the spear, but actually by throwing the spear, it wasn't very effective. I'm going to try stabbing. I'm going to keep the spear in my hand and try and stab the fish. And judgment, my timing, my attention to detail. Okay, so I love that image for what it actually unpacks. But how does this work in our classroom? How can I take cognitive task analysis, which has an effect value of 1.29, and leverage it so that my students improve their engagement and their attainment? Let's have a look. This is how I use it. So for me in economics, actually writing examination essays is a task. Students need to be able to write that essay. So I could give them a title and I could say, write it. I could give them a suggested structure, and I could say, right, there's a suggested structure, write your essay. Or thirdly, I could have them reverse engineer the essay structure based on the mark bands. So this I've started doing more recently, and it works incredibly well. You give students the mark bands, the different levels. So 15 mark in economics, level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4, level 5, with all of the descriptors. And I say, right, try and work out an ideal essay structure based on those mark bands. And they will wrestle with it, and they will work it, and they will put together different structures, and we'll discuss them in class, and then we'll push towards the structure that is the most effective. But it's that cognitive task analysis, it's that engagement with it that actually then produces a much higher starting point for initial essays than I would have got if I just said, write an essay. Also, looking at internal assessment as a task, I create organizers that scaffold the skills, and early on, I will supply students with a newspaper article, and as an example of an image, it should pop up on your screen in a few seconds. So I'll give them articles on vanilla, cobalt. This was one I did this year on the interdependent nature of dynamic markets. And I kind of lead students through a process of steps. And then what I've started doing is having them think about the task. So scaffolded initially, and then the next time take out 1 or 2 columns, the next time take out another 1 or 2 columns, and keep pulling the scaffold down. And so then they are thinking, they are engaging more and more in that task. What do I need to do? What needs to come next? And it's that process of task analysis that helps them to strengthen it. So by the time we introduce the IA, and with my grade 11s this year, they are in a great place to write their first IA because we've gone through that process. They've been through the cognitive task analysis. Okay, how else? So problem-based learning, interesting. So problem-based learning is a separate category in its own right. But after we've done a unit, so for example, we've taught all of macro, I will establish a problem, something like this. COVID has created a K recovery in the USA economy. Evaluate different approaches the Biden government could take to solve this problem. Now, if they answer the question, that's not cognitive task analysis. That is problem-based learning. That's happening. But the cognitive task analysis happens in how do we best approach this question? Which sources are we going to look to give us evidence and for us to base our evaluation on? How are we going to work the research? If we're doing this in a group, who is going to do what portion of the research, and what standard do we expect everyone to meet? So you begin to create some of that discussion around the task, and that is cognitive task analysis. Okay, I hope that's helpful. Let's go on to number 2. Time for a quick coffee. We are at 31 minutes. Self-reported grades. So self-reported grades, they have a value of 1.33. I love this image on the right because really the analogy of coaching is perfect for self-reported grades. As coaches, we can see our players' potential. So we might be in the middle of a rugby match or an American football match, and we know, and I'm making this up as I go along, we know that Frankie is the fastest kid on the field. Frankie has the speed to run around the outside and hit the end zone. But Frankie doesn't know that. So we have a timeout and we have a huddle. And as a coach, I speak to Frankie and I'm like, Frankie, you got this. You can do this. They may be bigger than you. They may look faster than you. But if we get the ball in your hands, what I want you to do is I want you to head around the outside as fast as you can possibly go and head down the touchline all the way. You've got this. You can do this. Now, as coaches, we do that all the time with our sports teams. And this is where self-reported grades actually become, we transfer that coaching analogy from the football or the American football field into our classroom. Once a student has performed at a level, that is beyond their own expectations, he or she gains confidence in his or her learning ability. And you better believe, like, once Frankie hits that end zone, his confidence is soaring and he knows that he's got this and that he can do it. So how do I do this in my classroom? I'm going to go through these very quickly. I start the year by explaining that high levels of achievement are possible for all students. I really focus on this growth mindset that intelligence is not fixed and it is about the learning process. So I want students to begin to be exposed to that narrative from my very first lesson. Then I use formatives to build confidence. Little steps of victory help to raise self-belief, self-efficacy, to impact on motivation and shift students forward. Then when it comes to summatives, I meet one-to-one with students after every summative to discuss. And in that discussion, we talk about the learning process. We talk about revision. How did you revise? How much time did you give to revision? What do you think worked? What did not work? And we really start thinking about learning in those discussions. And they're quite tough to have because you lose content time, but you end up gaining in so many ways by losing the content time. It may take 2 lessons to have these conversations, but they are so worth it. And then also you can refer back to previous targets. So a key part is setting the grade for the next summative based on the lessons learned. At the end of the conversation, if a student scored a bottom 5, I might say, so taking into account our conversation, what do you think you could hit in the next summative if you make those adjustments? Could you hit a top 5, bottom 6, mid 6? Like, what do you want to aim for? And that's where using self-reported grades becomes a powerful mechanism to shift students forward over a period of time. Okay, classroom discussion, power strategy number 3. What is it? I've got this image because that really is what my school career was like. In fact, I remember getting sent out of the classroom for talking, and I was asking someone the time at that point. So that's how strict it was. Thank goodness our classrooms are not like that. It involves the entire class in a discussion and allows students to improve communication skills by voicing their opinions and thoughts. Teachers also benefit from classroom discussion as it allows them to see if students have learned the concepts that are being taught, and it creates an environment where everyone learns from each other. Now, it's important to note that this needs to be structured, that discussion is not just a free-for-all. It's not an opportunity for students to just tease out knowledge, and we don't teach knowledge. If you've got a content-based syllabus, we should still be taking responsibility for that. But it's about engagement and providing a platform for critical thinking to happen with discussion. If you think of Bloom's taxonomy, moving through the levels of Bloom's taxonomy to the point of developing critical thinking, discussion is a key way to do that, because to verbally justify an argument requires critical thinking. Okay, so how do I use this in a time-efficient manner in my classroom? Many teachers use other different discussion formats, which fishbowl discussion, Socrative discussion, etc. This is what I use in my classroom. I use hinge questions and essential questions and TOK questions at strategic points. One of the things I love to do is actually to start a lesson with an essential question. So before we started lessons on maximum price recently, I put this question to the students. I was caught in a rainstorm in San Francisco, and my taxi ride with Uber cost $192 due to surge pricing. Unbelievable. I was fuming. Is that fair? Should governments intervene and limit the pricing when it comes to that situation? And that's how we started the lesson. 15 minutes flew by with a really detailed, engaging discussion. It's a great way to capture imagination, to connect real world examples to some of the theoretical aspects of what we do in our classroom. So whatever your subject is, you can actually Google a list of essential questions for that. You can begin to develop that. There's a lot available. How else do I use it? I use provocative statements to generate discussion. So this could happen at any point in the lesson. People with a low level of skill deserve to be paid less, agree or disagree. You could get even more provocative than that, saying people who've never had any schooling people who've never had any schooling deserve to be paid low wages, agree or disagree. You could get incredibly provocative, and you begin to push the thinking with follow-up questions and asking the why. So provocative statements are a good way to generate discussion. Very time efficient in class to use those. Also, sometimes I set an evaluation question, I write it up on the board, and instead of students answering it, I put them into small groups as in the image, and I have them discuss different points that they could bring to the conversation, and then rank them in order, not of inclusion, but of priority. They would rank them in order of priority. Okay, power strategy 4. I'm not going to say anything about that one. Let's move on. Okay, so powerful conceptual change. This is the idea of helping your students to connect to new learnings, to their prior knowledge. It's powerful. It's not new. Lots of textbooks are now including sections with the word misconception, dealing with misconceptions. And this is what the conceptual change process is about. So there are 4 steps to using this strategy in your classroom. I'll give you an example. So the first one is to identify misconceptions. And as teachers, we've all been in that position where we ask a question and a student gives an answer that is 100% incorrect. And we've all been in that position where there's an awkward moment. It's like, my voice goes high, and it's like, how am I going to help the student move on? Sometimes both myself and colleagues just say, no, that's wrong, move on to the next student. But what I've learned is when students give incorrect answers, I stop, I pause, and I say, that's not the right answer, but I'm really curious why you thought it was. Talk me through your thinking. And I have been amazed at how, as students talk me through their thinking, I become more aware of misconceptions based around the teaching and learning that's happening in my classroom. But a second thing begins to happen. As they talk me through their thinking, often they realize that their thinking is flawed. And by talking me through their thinking, they begin to make connections to theory that they've learned, and they create cognitive dissonance. They begin to realize, hang on, something doesn't match up here. And it's like, I still don't fully understand it, but it's not matching up with my previous conceptions. And that's what cognitive dissonance is. And I can guide them and help them a little bit in that process. Then you explain the correct concept. And then finally, I would ask questions where students then have to engage with the questions that I'm asking, which clarify the correct concept. If they answer the question incorrectly, they still don't have the concept correctly understood. If they answer it right, it reinforces that correct concept. So conceptual change strategy, a really powerful, a very powerful session. Okay, so.
Steve, can I just jump in real quick?
We've got 2 minutes left, haven't we? Okay, Anne. Yeah, we have 2 minutes left. I started my clock late, I'm sorry. So, beautiful people, what I'm going to do is wrap it up with this. And self-regulated learning, I was always going to touch very lightly, because I've added some research to the end that I would love you to read. It tells you more about self-regulated learning, and it kind of unpacks the fact that you've got 3 aspects of self-regulated learning, and it gives you a different model which you can read and explain about. And this is kind of taking it to the next level. If you're ready for the next level, this is where I want to point you. Some research based from Euclides 2011. And the benefit of self-regulated learning is it taps into loads of Hattie's strategies. So this is kind of like the end explosion, where it's like, if you really want to get funky with the stuff, go and have a look at self-regulated learning. And as part of metacognition, there's this wonderful document by the Education Endowment Foundation, which looks at a whole school approach to self-regulated learning and metacognition. Okay, thank you so much.